In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a graphic organizer featuring different kinds of notes and their values. I hope you can use this as a tool to help you with your counting of rhythm and just understanding basic note values. So what we're going to do first is we're going to select 3 different pieces of colored paper. The next step is to lay the 3 sheets of paper offset from each other about 1.5 inches apart. You can also use your pinky as a guide. The next step, while keeping these papers together, is you want to fold the top of your paper stack and fold it in a way that there are 6 different sections. Once you're happy with your 6 layers, you're going to make a crease on the top, and then we're going to flip it over. We're just going to make sure all the papers are stacked nicely together. We're going to make 2 staples, about 1/4 of the way into the top layer. And it should look something like this, so just double check that all the papers have a staple through it, and it should feel like a book. Our next step is that we're going to take the first layer, make a fold right before the staples, and then we're also going to take the second layer and do the same thing. What you should be left with is 4 layers. We're next going to take a scissors. We're going to find the middle point of the 3rd layer, and we're going to make a cut all the way through those 4 layers up to that point. After that, we're going to fold the 3rd layer up, and we're going to find the halfway mark between those 2 flaps, and we are going to make a cut up to that point as well. So what you should have is 3 layers of paper with 4 flaps. Following the same pattern, you're going to lift up the 4th layer, and with those 4 flaps, you're going to find the halfway point between them, and you are going to make cuts to each of those. What you should end up with now is the last 2 layers of paper cut into 8 individual flaps. Finally, we're going to fold over the 5th layer, and you should have 8 segments on the 6th layer. We're going to do exactly what we've done before, is we're going to cut each of those 8 flaps in half, and your final result should be the 6th layer having 16 flaps. So just to recap, your first 2 layers are not cut. Your 3rd layer is cut in half. Your 4th layer should have 4 flaps. Then your 5th layer should have 8 flaps. And lastly, your 6th layer should have 16 flaps. Next thing we're going to do is grab a marker, and on the first layer, begin writing note values 4/4 time. And 4/4 is a time signature, and you usually see this at the beginning of a piece of music. It just means that for every bar, there are 4 beats, and that the note that gets the beat is a quarter note. To our second layer, we are going to draw our first and largest note, the whole note. The whole note is 4 beats long, and the way to draw it is to visualize a donut that's been squished. On the top of the second layer, we are going to write a whole note, and we're also going to write that it is 4 beats. And don't forget to add its rest equivalent, and that looks like a hole in the ground. So that's just a line and a box underneath. As you break down notes into smaller notes, remember that you are always starting off with the original note and adding something to it. For example, with the whole note, when we break it up into 2 equal parts, we're going to start off with drawing our whole note, and then we're going to add a stick to each of those notes. When you take a whole note and you divide it in 2 equal parts, you get 2 half notes. And each half note is worth 2 beats. And let's not forget its rest, which looks like top hat. If we were to clap these two half notes in a bar, the first beat of the first half note would be on beat 1, beat 2 would be carried over, so that's why we're going to write it in bracket. Then the next half note will be clapped on beat 3, and the fourth beat will be carried over, and that will also be written in brackets. This will bring us to our fourth layer with 4 flaps. So when you take a half note and you divide it into 2 equal parts, you're going to get a quarter note. How to draw the quarter note? We're actually going to start off with drawing half notes, and then we're going to fill in the circle. At the top of our fourth layer, we're going to label our notes quarter notes. Each is worth 1 beat. The easiest way to draw a quarter rest is to draw the letter Z on a diagonal, followed by a hook at the end. So in 4/4 time, each quarter note here would get 1 beat, which is why we are writing beats 1, 2, and 3, and 4 to each of the quarter notes. So on to the fifth layer now, we are going to break down these quarter notes into smaller notes. So we're going to first start off by drawing out all our quarter notes. So in the same pattern, when we break down a note into smaller notes, there is going to be a slight change, and in this case, we are going to add a tail to the smaller notes, which are 8th notes. On the top part of the fifth layer, we're going to write an 8th note, and if 2 8th notes equal 1 quarter note, which is 1 beat, then each 8th note is going to equal half a beat. And an 8th rest would look like the number 7, and then you just draw a dot on the tip of it. Now we know that for every quarter note, that equals 2 8th notes. So we know that the first 8th note, if we were to clap it, would be on beat 1, but what would we write for the second 8th note? The other half we are going to call and that is going to be written as a plus sign. So if I'm counting all 8 of these 8th notes, it's going to sound like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And finally, onto the last layer. So we're going to take each of these 8th notes, we're going to divide it in half again, and we have 16 flaps, so we're going to go ahead and just write out our 8th notes. And the only difference that we're going to add to these 8th notes is that we're going to add an extra tail, and it's going to look like this. So when an 8th note is divided equally into 2 notes, they are called 16th notes. So in order to figure out how many beats a 16th note is worth, let's go back to how many beats a quarter note is. So we know that 1 quarter note is equivalent to 1 beat. We know that 2 8th notes are equivalent to 1 beat. And we also know that 4 16th notes are equivalent to 1 beat. So 1 divided by 4 is going to be a quarter. So therefore, 1 16th note is a quarter of a beat. To draw a 16th rest, you are going to draw a 7 with a dot on it like an 8th rest, and then we're going to add an extra curve right underneath. To figure out how to count 16th notes, we're going to flip back to the quarter notes and take a look at where the 4 beats fall. So we know that there are 4 16th notes for every quarter note. The first 16th note of every quarter note gets the beat. To figure out which 16th note carries the and, we're going to go back to the 8th note page and find each 8th note that has the beat and find that first 16th note. So when we're looking at 4 consecutive 16th notes, we are subdividing a beat into 4s. So the first beat is going to be 1, for example. The next 16th note is going to be E. The one after that is and, or the plus sign. And finally, the 4th 16th note would be or the letter A. You're going to continue this pattern for every single beat until you reach the end of beat 4. And that, my friends, is how you make your graphic organizer on note values, and this is what your final product should look like.